Jeremiah. Now, the Lord willing, we're going to attempt to present this book. It is not preached on very often or studied as a book. There's a lot of little, go to certain parts of Jeremiah and you get a sermon and call unto me while I'm near, that type of thing. And there's been little sermons, but you don't have too many times where the book is preached through in the book of Jeremiah. One reason is 52 chapters. Another reason, it is chaotic. And what I mean by that, you can't read the book of Jeremiah chronologically. You can't say, well, chapter 1 is, and you go all the way through to chapter 52. It doesn't work like that. It's fragmented. There's a few chapters up front that says about a certain time period in Jeremiah's life, and then there'll be the next few chapters may be 20 years later, and then the next few chapters may go back to 10 years before that. So it's so fragmented that it is confusing in the point that unless you're going to lay it out as a chart and see where the chapters fit, you won't get a vision. Now, every time, it's always good to pick up one of the Gospels because generally the Gospels start out about the birth of Christ, and then it's his young life, and then his ministry with his disciples, and then his crucifixion, and then his resurrection. And that's the way it happens from the first chapter in the gospel to the last chapter. But when you get in a book like Jeremiah and Isaiah and Ezekiel, you can't read it like that, because if you do, you'll be going, what in the world is it talking about? But if you focus on where you're at and what's being done, wow, it does make good sense. And I tell you, we're living in a day and age right now that if ever there was a time that a book ought to be looked at, it's now, Jeremiah. Jeremiah was a prophet to the failing Judah in Israel, the nation of Israel, the Judah, the southern tribes. They were on their way out. They had reached the height and zenith of their life, and they were going downhill. In fact, Jeremiah was watching the demise of his own country. And he was called on by God to prophesy of their doom. So what kind of guy wants to do that? Now, Jeremiah wasn't like Elijah. Elijah, he'd prophesy of your doom and stick you in the face with it. But Jeremiah, he's a very sensitive guy. And I mean that. He wept over his nation, their demise and their impending doom. And he was a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, just like it was said of the Lord Jesus in the book of Isaiah. We know Jeremiah is known as the weeping prophet. Now, there's a lot of things he was weeping over what was going to happen, but he's also weeping on how they treated him. I mean, his own countrymen, they hated him. He was a guy that didn't have any friends. He preached for 40 years. 5 kings he ministered in their reign. And when it was said and done, he had no converts and apparently no influence in the moment. When he died, it's said by tradition, not by Scripture, but by Jewish historians, that Jeremiah died in Egypt, stoned by his own countrymen who were in exile there. They didn't like him down there because he kept saying, here's what God said. If you don't get right with me and repent of your evil ways and quit following the false gods and the false prophets that tell you what you want to hear, if you don't quit doing that, you're going to end up in judgment, and it's going to be bad. It's not going to be easy. And they hated him. for 40 years, even after what he had been prophesying came true. He just and really the last 5 years of his life, he was with them in Egypt, a remnant of the exiled Judaites. So it is in fact, I'm going to get you some charts that you can stick in your Bible, but give you a timeline. Isaiah, remember, he was when King Hezekiah was king. Isaiah prophesied, and in fact, he was close. Hezekiah and Isaiah were close, and when Hezekiah died, it stunned Isaiah. But Jeremiah doesn't come along till 60 plus years later. So these two giant prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah, were, I'm looking at 60 years ago in America. Here we are in 2023. So we're talking about, 1960? That's how long between Isaiah and Jeremiah is. Now, the thing is, when Isaiah was prophesying, the 10 northern tribes, they got done in by the Assyrians, Sennacherib, and so they were captive and carried away. But those southern tribes, they were still free and still prospering. But rather than realize that their brethren up north, what happened to them, they did not learn any lessons from what happened to their 10 northern tribes. You would have thought they would have said, "Ooh, we don't want that to happen to us." We in America can relate to this because we can look how weak our European heritage is over there. See, they're depending on America to uphold them. You take England and Norway and even France, but Sweden, even Germany. Listen, you take us out of the equation, they're nothing. We're their strength and have been since World War II. And so you would think we'd look at their debauched way of living and how they've been living over there for about 50 years, 60 years, and what it's done to their cultures and their society, and we'd say, "Oh, we don't want that." But no, we follow. In fact, we try to set our policy by saying, "Well, the Europeans do it this way." Well, the Europeans only are standing because of the American military, which now we don't know about that anymore. This wokeism has entered into the military where they're now trying to get diversity to the point that they're advertising with drag queens as a recruitment tool for the Navy. How bizarre can you get? You take a young man who's got an ego, a real young man who's got an ego, he's not going to want to be around any of that. So consequently, they can't recruit anymore. Not because folks don't want to be patriotic and fight for their country. They don't want to be involved in that wokeism atmosphere. So recruitment on all the branches are down. I think Coast Guard's the only one that's not. And we don't really know how bad it is. If you have to start recruiting drag queens, you know that there must be pretty bad. And so all of this is happening before our eyes, and we ought to be seeing that whatever we're doing as a culture and as a nation, it's not working. We're watching it decay. Our major cities are nothing more than crime scenes. I mean, San Francisco's got so much with the businesses pulling out of the city, they can't operate anymore down there. There's no law that'll stop shoplifting. All across the country, because of the lack of emphasis on law and order, businesses are having to move out. They can't just give away all their merchandise to shoplifters. And then all of the uncontrolled drug addiction and homelessness that won't be treated with the emphasis it needs to be treated with, as far as how to get it fixed or how to make some kind of appropriation for it. It's just closing these cities down. Chicago, they just elected another mayor that's anti-police. I'm thinking, if this is what everybody's going to do, what's wrong with people? They're griping and complaining about the crime, and they're voting in the people who won't help them. How is this possible? Well, Jeremiah was dealing and seeing the same things with Judah in his career. And he kept saying, God said, I'm going to give you words, and I want you to speak the words that I give you to the people. And Jeremiah faithfully discharged his duty, only to find out everybody hated him for it. And he wasn't the kind of personality that dealt with people's hatred. Like Elijah, he wouldn't care. Elisha wouldn't care. And Ezekiel wouldn't care if people hated him. In fact, he'd count it a badge of honor. Not so with Jeremiah. He was more soft-spoken and under-the-radar type guy. So he is, remember, a prophet of doom, and he literally was crushed by what he saw. He eventually wrote his most bitter feelings in the book of Lamentations. And that's all what Lamentations is about, is Jeremiah's overwhelmed, crushing spirit that was crushed from what he was seeing and how people were dealing with him. So he came to rule under a good king named Josiah. And Josiah was Hezekiah's grandson. Now, the thing about Josiah was one of those kings that we studied in the book of 2 Kings that was a good king. He went about making reforms in Judah. And he said, we're going to quit worshiping these false gods. We're going to tear down these groves and these places where people do their seances, and we're going to quit allowing the Canaanite gods to control our country, and we're going to quit honoring these false deities that don't really exist. And he went in there as a government and began to put a caption on the way the country's been under his wicked dad Manasseh. And so Jeremiah was there to help Josiah make these reforms, only to find out that some 20 years later, after they cleaned up, hey, that'd be like, a president coming in and shutting down all this wokeism and cleaning up the internet to get all the pornography off of it, and quit allowing these groups that proclaim to want to tear down America have a public arena. That'd be us coming in there cleaning all that up. And then in turn, we get it done for about 20 years. Then about 3 administrations later, we're right back where we were, and even worse. That's what happened with Josiah. He made these reforms, but it turned out the reforms were what we call superficial. They were surface reforms. The hearts of the people never changed. And boy, that really upset Jeremiah. He saw that, and he was grieved. And so as we approach this book, and we're going to have some young people come over in just a minute, or some awards tonight in Awana. He wanted the people to get prepared for captivity and for judgment. And then even when we get into further in the book of Jeremiah, he's going, after they go into captivity, carried away to Babylon. And he's going to encourage them not to resist, but to go into that place and be the best they can be as a testimony to God. So he was actually preaching to the captive Jews. He preached to them before they went into captivity. He preached to them while they were in captivity. And yet, they didn't respond to him either way. Now, I say all that because look there in verse 1 of chapter 1. In the words of Jeremiah, the son of Hilkiah, of the priests that were in Anathoth in the land of Benjamin. And that's where the priests went in David's day. They came from that area. It was known to be a place where priests were raised up and taught and sent out to the people. But right now, all those priests were corrupt. See, what do you mean by that? Well, they bought into the heathenism and paganism that the rest of the country had bought into. You don't get too many in today's world. Look, and I'm a preacher, and I know the condition of preachers now. I had somebody tell me that was 90 years old the other day. Said, boy, we missed the good old days of hellfire and damnation. That's what we need. Well, now you get preachers who are trying to acquiesce to the culture. They do all kind of strange things to try to be cool. I've noticed that. I don't want to be cool to this worldly crowd. Listen, I remember I was part of that crowd before I got saved. And if they knew that crowd like I knew that crowd, they wouldn't want to act cool. Well, they come up with all kind of stuff, I see some. I'm surprised at some of the stuff I see, even amongst fellas I know. I'm wondering, what's happened to you? Why would you do that? Do you not have any dignity? Are you not grave and sober in some respect? Why would you do something to try to appear cool to a crowd so they'll come be at your church? When in reality, you can't get up there and say, if you don't get right with God, you're going to die and go to hell. And you Christians, if you're not right with God, you're backslidden. God's going to chasten you. Not going to ever say that and name things. It's just not going to happen. So the condition of Judah in the time of Jeremiah is similar, if not equal, to the condition of America in our time. There's so many parallels in this book. As we move along, you're going to go, wow, this does look exactly like us. And so that's what we're entering into. And he said, to whom the word of the Lord came in the days of Josiah, the son of Ammon, king of Judah, in the 13th year of his reign. So at this time, it appears Jeremiah was somewhere between 14 and 16 years old. And so Josiah is the man he wants to ride in with. And also, it came also in the days of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah. Jehoiakim, not good. Unto the end of the 11th year of Zedekiah, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, unto the carrying away of Jerusalem captive in the 5th month. So he just gave you in verse number 3 the timeline of his prophecy. 40 plus years. Now he served under 5 kings. He didn't name some of them right there because they were so insignificant. Hey, one of them, Jehoiachin, I believe he was only there 3 months. He was nothing. And Jehoiakim is the one that ends up being his nemesis. He never would cut. Listen, he did everything he could to destroy Jeremiah. Now that's the prophet to the country with which he was king. And so they knew what he was saying they didn't like to hear. They didn't like to hear what he had to say. They didn't want any part of it. And I guarantee you, and I'm not a hard preacher myself, but I know this. I've got friends in the ministry that are afraid for me to speak to their congregations. They're not heathen. They just don't want me getting up there saying stuff like, this church looks like the same church that was there in the Apostle Paul's day in the book of Acts. How a bunch of low-life heathen, pagans, they're afraid Cooley is going to mess up their congregation. And it's kind of a running joke. One guy told me if he ever needed pew space in his church, he'd call me and he'd know I could help empty out a few. But I don't take pride in that. I don't even think about that. That's not right. In fact, they're not right when they say that. That's not me. I would be sure. But the thing is, it is a running joke. And so what we find in Jeremiah's day, they didn't like hard preachers. Now I'm going to tell you something. They never quit going to the temple. They were going to the temple till Nebuchadnezzar came down and burnt the thing to the ground. They were still going to they were doing their sacrifices and their worship of God, but at the same time they were incorporating Hinduism and Buddhism and Islamism and honoring their gods too. That's what was going on. And so don't ever get the idea, well, now, what kind of lifestyle do they have? Oh, they lived like a bunch of heathen. I'm telling you, while they were taking on all these false deities and gods, they were living their life like a pagan could. They were partying, drinking, drugging, living immoral, giving over to the god of recreation, just doing all that stuff, That was their god. And so, but in their mind, as long as they kept that temple open and showed up on Christmas and Easter, everything was fine. And I'm here to tell you that for the most part, and I'm not talking about liberal Christianity, I'm talking about Bible fundamental Christianity that used to be on the front line. Today, there is a general feeling that if you show up a couple of 3 times a year, too many, and it's getting more pervasive. Every now and then send a check in. Everything's okay. Forgetting that the testimony that you give your neighbors by not being in the place where people worship God on Sunday morning, they don't even think about what their neighbors are thinking. I know neighbors. They don't go to church. But if you don't go, they think something's wrong. They expect you to be at church. I told this, but years ago, and we do sometimes where we won't have an evening service on a special holiday or something. And inevitably, when that happens and my car is in my driveway on Sunday night, one of them, if not more than one, comes over and say, "Hey, notice you weren't at church tonight." Yeah, well, we had an afternoon. I start explaining it. I feel guilty because I know how people do. So what I'm saying is Jeremiah was dealing with people who had the same lackadaisical attitude about honoring God with their time and their life. And we're living in the same. And what's going to happen? Well, we know what's going to happen because the same thing's going to happen to this country as happened in Judah. Things are going to continue to go south. Now, if I hire me a band, a rock and roll band, put them up here on Sunday morning, drop all the convictions that we have. Say it's not important what doctrines you believe. Because people still leave this church, over doctrine. Bible and historic Baptist doctrine. They do. They'd say, we don't believe that. Well, when you came here, there's a sign out there that says Burgess Road Baptist. That's why a lot of churches are dropping Baptists, because, see, they don't want people to think that they have this doctrine they believe is, with conviction, is a Bible doctrine. And so if we say we're not going to do that anymore, listen, if you believe in speaking in tongues, then you come on in, it's all right. And we'll do something to accommodate you. We just won't speak on them on the platform, but if you want to just speak on them in your Sunday school classes and speak on them in congregations, you go right ahead. I'm telling you, you could do things, and yeah, I'm concerned about church growth. I am. And listen, the Lord knows we need something. That's why we recently sent out 2,200 cards. That's why we go out when people come by and visit. If they turn in their card, we're there. Many people don't want to turn in a card no more because they don't want to be bothered. And that's why we witness and pass out tracts. And I have to say this: people are passing out tracts in the church. Hundreds of tracts. We go through hundreds of tracts. So unless people are just taking them home and throwing them in the garbage can, I'm telling you, the gospel's going out. But yeah, I'd like to see more folks coming in for sure. But at the same time, if it means you got to do all that, well, I'm done, because I'm not doing it. I am not biting that stuff. I know where it comes from. I still remember being lost. I didn't get saved. I was 21. I know where all that stuff comes from. I lived in it, and I recognize it. And it's not of God. It didn't come from God. Now, that's not saying everybody that practices that's heathen. No, there's lots of good saved people. They say we can't do nothing about it. Thank God, as I said the other day, the Methodists stood up. 42,000 United Methodist churches have left the denomination because they said, we've had enough. We're not backing off that. All right, I think I see the little darlings out there. They're going to come in and reward or award or pull up and pluck down or build, and that's what Jeremiah did. He was told to tear down and pull up, and then he said, and then build. All right, Diane, anytime